Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. Welcome, Delegate Jeffrey Bourne and Lamont Bagby. Good to see you both.
Good to see you.
We were talking earlier about a new sheriff in town. Talk to us about
I didn't say that.
New leadership. I did. Let's talk to us about your new leadership and how important that is.
Well, we're excited about the new leadership, and although we serve in the House, we're also excited about the Senate leadership. In the Black Caucus, we have on the House side, we have 7 of the 14 committees will be chaired by Virginia Legislative Black Caucus members, and so we're very excited about that. Chanel Herring is the majority leader. I oftentimes make the mistake of saying minority leader because we've been in the minority so long, but she'll be the majority leader. You have committees like Commerce and Labor, which will be chaired by Jawan Ward, which Jeff and I both serve on, and the Appropriations Committee, which individuals often say is the most powerful committee. I don't think so. I think it's Labor and Commerce Committee. But Luke Torrey and our good friend will be chairing that committee. Then on the Senate side, you have Louise Lucas, who will be President Pro Tem, which is historical. And then, of course, you have Eileen Phillicorn, who has a historical role as the first female speaker in the Commonwealth.
New committee assignments for you?
I do have one new committee assignment. I've been honored to have been selected as the vice chair of the Public Safety Committee, formerly known as Militia and Police. And that committee takes up everything from laws affecting our law enforcement and first responders to firearm and gun safety reduction measures. So excited about getting to work on that committee and on those issues.
So what does this new leadership mean to you?
Well, I mean, I think it means that Virginia's General Assembly really reflects the dynamic diversity of Virginia, and the new leadership means that we are going to make some progress on some critical issues that have remained stagnant for too long. And so as we begin this session in earnest, you'll begin to see things happen that I believe fall in line with what most Virginians want out of their General Assembly.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the initiatives you have this year, especially in terms of healthcare, balanced billing. Tell us about that and why that's so important.
Yeah, it goes by a couple of names: balanced billing or surprise billing. It's the bill you get after you go to the hospital, go to the doctor, and you think that you have taken care of all the costs associated with that visit with a co-payment or what have you. And then a couple months later, you get a bill, and some people get bills for $20,000, $50,000 from that visit. And so what we want to do is make sure that individuals don't go into the hospital or ER or to the doctor and then later on get a surprise bill that is often putting them in a position where they can't pay their other bills. Sometimes it's as big as a car, the purchase of a car. And so we want to make sure that whatever we have to do with the hospitals and the insurance companies, we resolve that and don't give individuals or put those costs on the individuals and let hospitals and insurance companies resolve their issues.
So how would that process work? Is that a process of arbitration or some other process?
Well, we just want to make sure that our goal in this bill is just to take the the patient out of the equation. And there'll be some conversations and things will move as it relates to the insurance companies and the hospitals, but we just want to take the patient out of the equation, because the patient signs up for the care and for the agreement with the insurance company, and anything that the hospital and the insurance company can't resolve shouldn't be passed on to the patient.
I see. And Delegate Bourne, I know you have some legislation dealing with fair housing. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, this year I think we want to continue to make some progress on affordable housing, making investments in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, making sure that we're not discriminating against affordable housing projects in our land use and regulatory decision-making bodies at the local level. In addition, we also want to make sure that we're not discriminating against people simply because they may have a housing choice voucher.
Section 8 of the Federal Housing Act, I believe.
Correct. And one of the bills that I'm really excited about that I'm working with a lot of folks on is the creation of a low-income housing or housing opportunity tax credit at the state level to really mirror what we do at the federal level, and so that we can really incentivize developers, both private sector, nonprofit, to create more affordable units, because it's both a supply problem and a demand problem that is our affordable housing crisis.
How big is that crisis?
It's huge. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers. I don't have them in front of me, but I know that there are far less available units than the demand calls for, and as a byproduct of that, we also want to make sure that we're diversifying our neighborhoods so that kids and young people can grow up seeing folks from all walks of life, and everybody can enjoy equal opportunity to have good, safe, affordable housing.
There's been a lot of publicity over the last year or so about the high eviction rate in the Richmond area. How does this relate to that, if at all?
Well, I mean, I think housing is a very interconnected issue, right? If folks have good, affordable, truly affordable housing, then the likelihood that they would not be able to pay their rent and therefore maybe fall victim to an eviction proceeding, it's better. It's better for the consumer. It's better for the homeowner, the renter, to be able to afford the roof over their head. I think on the eviction side, what we want to do is continue to make investments in eviction diversion programs so you can help people avoid eviction. But even more importantly, I think for those folks that have faced or are facing an eviction proceeding, that we make investments into legal aid so that they can have the resources of a lawyer there to help them and shepherd them through the process. Because if you've never been to court, or if you're facing an eviction, it can be a pretty daunting experience, and we want to make sure that the people who need our help the most are protected and have help that they need.
And go ahead.
I think a lot of the things that we're pushing this year is between the have and the have-nots. And I know that Delegate Bourne and Mamie Locke and Jennifer McClellan have been pushing not only for the things that he just outlined, but also to make sure that the tenants have the resources they need when it's time to go to court and stand up against the landlord, particularly when the landlord has been slummed, for no better term, I'm sorry. But also when we look at predatory lending, all these things are things that set the haves and the have-nots apart. And what we want to do is to make sure that they aren't preyed upon, those individuals that have not do not have the resources or the knowledge to understand when they're being preyed upon, whether it's housing or financial institutions providing predatory loans.
Give us a little bit more detail about your legislation. Someone once remarked to me that there are more payday lending facilities in the state of Virginia than there are McDonald's hamburgers, for example, and the interest rates obviously are extraordinarily high.
Yes, and the arguments that we've had, and we'll have a full debate over these issues, but the arguments that we've heard is that the rates have to be that high. And we have, and Delegate Bourne has been right by my side on raising this argument, but they argue to us that the rates have to be 180 to 300% we want to cap it at 36%. And we still look at that as high. I wouldn't allow anybody in my family to accept a loan over 36%, and so I wouldn't want anybody in the Commonwealth to have to do that as well. If you need money for a light bill or health care or anything else you might need immediate funds to cover, getting a $500 loan and then having to pay 180 to 300% on top of that. Well, if I didn't have the 500, how am I going to have that 180 to 300% additional plus fees to cover that huge loan? And so it's one of those things where I'm committed in everything that I do is in breaking cycles of poverty, but this is a snowball effect on individuals being preyed upon.
And of course, it affects housing in terms of people's credit ratings and the ability to get housing.
Absolutely. I mean, and as my good friend Lamont just said, and as your viewers can likely tell, many of the issues that I and the Black Caucus are working on are very interconnected. And I think it all gets back to making sure that what we do here in Virginia, how we govern ourselves, what rules we put in place at the state level are done in an equitable way. So that just because you're poor, just because you live in a certain part of the state, or for me, a certain part of the city, doesn't determine the likely outcome of your life or the likely outcome of your children's lives. And so when we talk about making sure that whether it's folks don't get the surprise bill, making sure that if folks find themselves needing to borrow money, that they can do so, but at the same time they're not getting gouged and not getting preyed upon. Making sure that when I've got a family, that I can find a good, decent place to live that's affordable for me. Making sure that just because I might not have as much money as someone else and I have a housing choice voucher, that I can have an equal opportunity, an equitable opportunity to go and rent a place. I think, all these issues that we're working on, whether it be making sure that we fund education in an equitable way or all these other issues that we've already talked about, I mean, that's really at the core of how we serve the people that we represent, is making sure that everybody has an equitable opportunity to take advantage of all that Virginia has to offer.
And of course, Delegate Bagby, as you well know, words have meaning. The past can be prologue, unfortunately. History may not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And I know you have a bill to do away with a lot of language that still perpetuates the Virginia Code in terms of race.
Yeah, and I have to give credit to the individuals that have been working on the commissions. We've set up a couple of commissions, African American Commission and a commission just to solely look at education, and a commission to solely look at the code. And so what we'll be doing is with their findings, we are going to make sure that we address those issues that they found in the code. One of the things that I was doing even before they started their work is looking at how redlining has impacted us even to this day.
Talk to us about that term, redlining.
Redlining is when people of color could not live in respective communities simply because of the color of their skin. And so a lot of times people want to talk now about gentrification, but gentrification and redlining are closely aligned when you see how people move. And the third piece of that is white flight. And so with what I'm working on this session is there's sections, well, there are on respective community deeds, and I hate to throw a community out there, but it gives a little bit of the flavor, like a community like Lakeside here in the Richmond area, and they're all across the Commonwealth. But on the deed for those homes says that they cannot sell it to a person of color. And those are still on deeds today. And so what we want to do is make sure that as we sell property or leave property to family members, we erase those from the deeds. And I couldn't believe that I had individuals that objected to that. But I have individuals that object to us taking that off of deeds as we transfer deeds.
So what was their rationale?
They want to protect history, and they don't want to erase history and so they wanted that to remain on the respective deeds. But no one should live in a home, even if they are allowed to move in the home. That's no question. But no one should live in a home where the deed says I'm not supposed to live here.
And I think there was another recent example. A couple, an interracial couple, went to get married, and I think the clerk said, "Well, you have to list your race on this form." That's another example.
It is, and you know, our code is chock full of these outdated and offensive terms and provisions, many of which, you know, to Delegate Bagby's point, you know, they want to protect history, but a lot of these things have been already outlawed and found unconstitutional, and so, you know, it's beyond my comprehension why folks have that much reverence for that divisive of history. And so I look forward to pressing my green button when his bill comes to the floor and making sure that we rid the code, rid our deeds of these divisive and offensive pieces.
What about voter registration, especially absentee voting without a reason?
That's a no-brainer. I mean, we have in Virginia for too long done things that make it more difficult, more cumbersome for people to vote and exercise their most fundamental basic right, which is that to vote. And so you'll see many proposals this year to make it easier. No excuse absentee balloting. You know, we'll chip away at the voter ID law and hopefully get rid of that too, and things like that just have no place in our democracy because we you know, on one hand during election season we complain because turnout gets low, and then, you know, 2 months later we're making it more difficult, and I know what those measures are intended to do, which is exactly what they've been doing, which is suppress the vote of people who want real progress in Virginia.
I think it's Delegate Joe Lindsay has a bill to make voting day a holiday.
Yeah, and so we're so proud of Joe Lindsay because he is the chair of Privileges and Elections, and he has been working on making Election Day a holiday, as well as a number of the other things that I think that will make voting easier for individuals throughout the Commonwealth. And another big piece that will be coming through his committee is the ERA.
Equal Rights Amendment, yes. What about redistricting? Is that another bill that's going to come through his committee now? Not a bill, but that resolution, that constitutional amendment.
That will come through both of the respective Privileges and Elections committees. And I think we will find a resolution associated with redistricting. But there are some concerns with the amendment that was pushed forward last year in the majority Republican legislature.
And I know one of the concerns of the Black Caucus is the lack of significant minority representation on that commission.
Yeah. So and so I try to make it clear for individuals, this is the first time, not in the last 20 years, but in the history of the Commonwealth, that African Americans have a real seat at the table when it comes to redistricting. That African American have a real seat at the table when it comes to all these issues that we've discussed today. The challenge with this amendment is there are no guarantees that African Americans will be at the table. You can go throughout the Pocahontas building or throughout the Capitol and go into committee meetings or go into meetings, walk down halls and not see any African American. You can go to a lot of commissions and committee and not see an African American at the table. And so what we want to do is to make sure we guarantee African American participation in these commissions with the significant number of African Americans in the Commonwealth, and with the significant number, the highest level of African Americans in the General Assembly being 21. We want to make sure that our voices are heard and not erased.
And of course, there's a significant legal issue around that constitutional amendment as it relates to the ultimate arbiter of any map that is drawn appears to be the Virginia Supreme Court.
That's absolutely right. And you know, I trust that the people who have been appointed as judges and justices in Virginia uphold the law. However, without clear criteria, without instruction, they're left to their own devices. And while we expect and hope that they're as independent as they can be, clearly they all have ideologies, many of whom on the Supreme Court, their ideology doesn't necessarily jive with mine or his. And so the idea that the way the process would be set up, that you know, a legislator of one party or the other could throw a monkey wrench in it and just not sign off on it, and then it goes to the Supreme Court, all of whom, except I think 2, have been appointed by Republican General Assembly. Again, this is a concern and a challenge for communities of color that they might not have our best interests at heart. And so for these and many, many other reasons, I think there will be a robust discussion about the constitutional amendment going forward.
He's my attorney. He said it so much better than I would.
Well, is there a way to cure that with enabling legislation in terms of some criteria the court would have to use?
Sure. I think one of the things we want to make sure of if we go down the route of having enabling legislation is whether or not the constitutional amendment also moves forward, or because I think advocates and opponents alike would, if they're objective, would say that it's not, the amendment is not as good as it could be and should be. And so as a lawyer who has a great reverence for the Constitution, if we're going to amend our Constitution, we ought to do it right. And so one of the ideas that's been floated is, do you stand up a bill that basically becomes a new constitutional amendment, right? And so that it addresses the concerns about having significant minority participation in it. It addresses the sort of legal questions about who's the final arbiter, and if it gets to that final arbiter, what is the process by which they need to draw the lines, and what criteria are they supposed to use? And so, again, I'm not on privilege of election, but I have complete 100% confidence in the chairman, Joe Lindsay, to strike the balance and make sure that all of those questions, concerns that the Black Caucus has are addressed.
Go ahead.
I think, at least on our side of the aisle, we are all committed to 2 things. And how those 2 things happen, I think, is up for consideration. And that is to make sure that there's a fair redistricting process for 2021. But then the second piece of that is to make sure that we have something in place to have future legislatures held to that same standard of fair redistricting. And so how we do that remains to be seen, but I'm confident that we will reach a conclusion that will be in the best interest of the Commonwealth and fair, so that individuals are picking their legislators and we're not picking them.
Yeah, I was going to ask for somebody to clarify that. You are well versed in that. A lot of citizens don't understand that right now, you, meaning the General Assembly, decides who your constituents are going to be, in essence.
That's exactly right. And you know, just to echo what Lamont said, you know, many of us will run in whatever district is drawn. It doesn't matter to us. We obviously believe that we are the best choice and do a good job representing our constituents. But for too long, it's been, hey, let me draw my line down this block, but not this one, and that block, and not that one. And so what we committed to is nonpartisan, fair redistricting that makes sure it appreciates and protects communities of color, and that it works. You know, I think this issue is important enough to amend the Constitution, but again, it's got to be done the right way, because if you just do it through legislation, it's so easy for the next General Assembly to come in and undo what has been done.
And of course, one of the reasons why you have some new minority members in the General Assembly today is because of a lawsuit that threw out some of that redistricting because of racial bias.
Yeah, well, it wasn't necessarily racial bias. It was just putting more black people than the Constitution and our electoral and redistricting laws and principles allow. And so when you unpack those voters, to his point, African Americans have a very significant voice in what goes on. And so we want to make sure that we protect and enhance that. And
we want to make it clear also, and we've seen it happen time and time again, especially when we unpack those 11 districts. The goal is not to elect solely. As the Black Caucus chair, it is my goal. But it's not solely to elect more blacks. the goal is to allow blacks to elect their candidate of choice. And we see that time and time again, where there's not necessarily going to be a black individual that's representing them, but they should be able to choose their candidate of choice and not have all their votes bottled all up into one.
And this not only impacts the General Assembly, it impacts congressional districts as well, does it not?
Very much so.
The needs of historically black colleges and universities, are they being met today?
Oh man, I think if you saw particularly Dr. J at Norfolk State or Dr. Abdullah down at Virginia State, I think they're all smiles because they understand that we are so committed to making sure that our HBCUs finally get their fair share. And in the governor's budget, I think you see the beginning of that, where he has given them just about everything that they asked for. And so now it's up to us to find a way to draw a cherry on the top of that of that budget, where we really begin to give our HBCUs the funding that they so well deserve. It's time for us to stop the foolishness and the conversation about our universities being swallowed up by PWIs. It's our opportunity to finally fully fund those institutions that have held us up for so long.
Why are those institutions so important to you?
Well, I mean, I think that they throughout history have developed extremely important leaders all across this Commonwealth and all across this country, and they just provide an environment for so many students, and they really do nurture and grow great leaders, great community members, and that's not even to mention all the wonderful research and developments that go on in the laboratories of these classrooms. And so that's why it's so important to make sure that we continue to invest in those areas so that we do have the next Martin Luther King. We do have the list goes on and on of great HBCU graduates who have really shaped this world.
We'll give you the last say. Got less than a minute left. How will you measure success at the end of this session?
Well, I would measure success by looking at our agenda that we laid out earlier last week at the beginning of session. I would measure it by what we're able to accomplish, not watering down important legislation that impacts people, and how we fully take a full look at the budget and how we fund HBCUs and how we look at those pieces of legislation that we've outlined. I think it's all about the legislation and the budget. The pomp and circumstance was enjoyable, but now it's time to really get the work done and deliver for the people. They voted for us in record numbers in November, and it's now time for us, an opportunity for us to deliver.
Great. Lamont Bagby, Jeffrey Bourne, good to see you. Good luck.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.